Shalom WJC family, it's time for our weekly Torah Talk. This week in Shul we'll be reading Parshat Ki Tetze in the book of Deuteronomy. We're amidst the major legal code that Moshe is giving the people for when they come to the land. And this code in particular has a lot of laws that are Bein Adam L'Chavero, laws between man and other people, human beings and each other, as opposed to Bein Adam L'Makom, between a person and God. When we think of religion, we tend to think of these between a person and God kind of commandments. We think of prayer and the things that we do in synagogue and whatnot. We don't tend to think of what happens in our everyday lives. But Ki Tetze really outlines so much of what we do in our everyday lives and demands not only that we be active in helping people who are in need, which it does, but even in preventing injuries to those in need, or helping where we might not think it would be necessary. For example, building a parapet around our roofs, a sort of fence. They had flat roofs back in the day, and they used them often as patios. You had to build a fence so no one could accidentally fall off. And we're told from that command that we are also supposed to put fencing around any pits that might be on our property or anything that might produce harm to someone who just might not recognize that it's there. Similarly, we have laws about not allowing an animal to suffer. That even if we see the animal of our enemy suffering under its load, we should help to redistribute the load or to carry the load so that the animal won't suffer. Again, not being allowed to be indifferent to the animal suffering any more than we would be indifferent to who might fall off our roof or into a hole. This is part of Judaism's fabric, going back to the idea that everyone is created b'tselem Elohim, that their fundamental dignity, as Yitz Greenberg puts it in his new work, The Triumph of Life, the dignity of being human requires us to protect everyone who is human. And even, he says, raising up all life, because we believe everything has in it a soul. And therefore, even animals that are suffering, we are required to help them out. Within the context of all this very open and very life-affirming Torah, there comes a seemingly odd command. In Deuteronomy 23, verse 4, it says, Lo yavo Ammoni uMoavi bikal Adonai. No Ammonite or Moabite shall be admitted into the congregation of God. So no descendant of Ammon or descendant of Moab is allowed to become Jewish, to decide to convert to Jewish. This seems very odd, especially from the Torah that commands us again and again not to hate the Egyptian because we were sojourners in their country. How can it be that we're not supposed to detest the Egyptians who literally held us captive and enslaved us and committed genocide against us, throwing our babies into the river? And yet it's the Ammonites and the Moabites who cannot enter our congregation. The verse continues, Gam dor asiri lo yavo lahem bikal Adonai ad olam. No descendants of such, even to the 10th generation, shall be admitted into the congregation of Adonai. Why? Al davar asher lo kidmu etchem belechem uvamayim bederech b'tzeitchem mimitzrayim. Because they did not meet you with food and water on your journey after you left Egypt. And because of the incident with Bilam when he came to curse you. It's fascinating to me that it's not simply the incident with Bilam that creates this ban, but why should it? Why should all the people suffer not to be able to become Jewish if that's their will, or be limited in this way because of what happened with Bilam? But it's not only that. A prominent incident, at least in the Torah, has a whole parsha, a whole Torah portion named after it. But this idea that they didn't meet you with bread and water, right? That they saw the Jewish people in need and they were indifferent. Now, it's not that they got in their way. It's not that they attacked them, just that they were indifferent. And so one perspective is that indifference itself is disqualifying as a Jewish person. We are not allowed to be indifferent to suffering. Right? So just as there are positive commandments to make a parapet or build a fence around a hole, there's also a negative commandment. Don't be like the Ammonites and the Moabites. Now it says why that we can't convert them. They cannot convert if they want to Judaism. That seems like an odd way to express this. I would like to sort of build on a comment of the Kedushat Levi when he talks about Amalek. Right, that we should blot out Amalek. He says it's not that we're supposed to find Amalekites and kill them or hurt them or imprison them. Amalekites now being sort of interpreted as all anti-Semites, and that is also from this parsha, from Parshat Ki Tetze. But he says actually it's the Amalek of our heart, that we need to stamp out our Yetzer Hara, our will to do evil. And although Kedushat Levi does not say that, as far as I could find about the Ammonites and the Moabites, I think it's the same. First of all, we don't enforce this anymore. We don't know who is a descendant of Ammon or Moab, and so these rules are canceled out. But we might interpret them spiritually in the same way, that Ammon and Moab are the indifference in our hearts, and that you cannot be Jewish, you cannot do Jewish, you cannot be whole in your practice of Judaism if we are indifferent to the suffering not only of our fellow Jews, not only of our fellow neighbors, but really any kind of human suffering. It doesn't mean we can do something about it all the time. It doesn't mean that sometimes when human suffering is being caused by a certain amount of evil, and that evil needs to be stamped out, that we can't act on it. But even then, we shouldn't be indifferent to the moral difficulty of the act. We're living in a complicated world, and there's a lot of moral complications at this moment when it comes to indifference, when it comes to good and evil and suffering. No matter how we personally feel or how our Judaism teaches us to feel about how all of this is happening around the world and here at home, we are required by Judaism not to be indifferent, to feel the feelings and to act on those feelings in balance with all of the other factors. When we stop feeling the struggle, when we become indifferent to the suffering of others, even of enemies, we may be like Ammon and like Moab. We may be outside of the bounds of what our Judaism requires from us. It's hard to feel those feelings. It's complicated, especially when we are suffering ourselves. And yet Judaism demands no less from us than to hold these two things and these two feelings together at once. May we all be able to do that and thus move forward whole and with integrity in our Judaism, far from being the spiritual descendants of Ammon and Moab, the nations, at least as far as the Torah is concerned, of spiritual indifference. I wish you a Shabbat Shalom.